Grazie.
Finally. Good.
So, good afternoon, everybody. And I really apologize for not being there. I was supposed to come physically, but as you might have heard, there is an extraordinary ministerial meeting in Luxembourg for the energy and environment ministers of Europe because of the cost of gas. So I'm supposed to leave very soon, and I'm really sorry that I had to cancel my participation physically. Yet I would like to tell you a little bit more in detail what is the responsibility, as indicated by the title, of the central governments at global level towards the ecological transition. So let me explain you briefly what has happened over the last maybe 12 months. Since 2015, we all were aware about the fact that we had to reduce carbonization in order to keep the temperature rise by the end of the century below 2 centigrades. This is the so-called Paris Agreement, and I don't think I have to spend my time to remind you that the more carbon dioxide we produce by the human activities, the more we warm up the planet, and in turn this generates rise of the ocean levels, the desertification, change of biodiversity, and so on and so forth. This is a real threat to human survival in the future. So we have to keep this heating under control. Now, in the last year, what happened is that we had a number of international events, including the G20, that for the first time ever got together the energy and the environment on the same table. This is an historical step forward because normally environment and energy have been treated separately. And then there was the report of the IPCC, so the scientific organization that is monitoring the thermodynamics parameters and all the ecosystem parameters of the planet. And everything was pointed towards something bad. I mean, we are late. We are late in our decarbonization program. We are late compared to the roadmap that the Paris Agreement has established. And if we continue so, the temperature is supposed to rise well above 2 centigrades. We're talking about 2.5, 2.7 centigrades, which is really not affordable for the future. And I just want to remind everybody that this is not something dealing with the second, third order future generation. This is dealing with our kids at school now, because kids at primary school in this moment in Italy or in Europe or everywhere else in the world, in 2060, will be just adults in the range of 40 to 45 years, 46 years. And they might play the risk that they cannot live on the coast because the oceans will be rising the level by 20 centimeters or more. They will live in a world where agriculture is going to be complicated by the desertification. There will be lack of food, lack of water, lack of energy. So this is serious and it's very urgent. So urgency means that we have to raise our ambition and we have to accelerate on the roadmap of the Paris Agreement. Now today, just a little bit before the COP26 meeting, and last month we had the last pre-COP meeting in Milan and the Youth for Climate event, we ended up with the idea that we have to accelerate and we have to keep the global warming well below 2, and the target is 1.5 centigrades. I mean, this half a degree in terms of planet thermodynamics makes a huge difference. It means that locally, especially at the poles, the temperature can be 3-4 centigrades lower, because unfortunately the average value of the warming has nothing to do with the local value, and the temperature is rising a lot just there in the North Pole and the South Pole, where most of the water is stored in the form of ice. Well, so the first message, what states can do, the public has to work very hard to keep the concept of 1.5 degrees centigrade alive. This is something very hard. It's not only technology and thermodynamics, it's also international politics. You know, the G20 at the moment is not unanimously oriented in keeping the 1.5 alive. We have a number of big countries such as China, India, Russia. For those countries, it is very difficult to change the manufacturing system in order to further reduce the emission of greenhouse gas. So we have to understand that for relatively small and wealthy countries like Italy, France, Germany, it's easier to make a change in terms of manufacturing and primary energy production. For big countries such as China or India, this is more complicated. I mean, you're turning in a very narrow turn using a bus or using a small car. And of course, turning with a bus is more difficult. And we have to understand that this is, of course, the subject of a very intense discussion. Now, This is not the only problem we have, because the G20 actually is unanimously convinced that we have to keep the temperature under control. Maybe the point is whether we reach the peak of decarbonization at the year 2030 or at the year 2035. But in general, the spirit is common. Now, the point is that the G20 represents only 4.8 billion of people. And the relative differences among those peoples are not that big. Now, those 4.8 billion people produce approximately 80% of the greenhouse gas that is produced by humanity. Now, what do we do with the rest? There's 3 billion people left in the planet. They're producing much less than 20% of greenhouse gas. 1 billion of those have no access to free electricity. 2 billions don't have clean fuel for cooking in the house. And several hundred millions, they have to walk 30 minutes to reach a safe water source. And by the way, safe water by definition is not really drinkable. It's something, let's say, close to drinkable according to our standards. Now, even the concept of ecological transition changed dramatically whether you're talking to a guy in the G20 or you're talking to a guy in the rest of the world. And this is actually the very difficult task of the COP26. That's finding a common metric, finding a common strategy to reduce the climate change, to reduce the global warming, but using rules and using methods that cannot be the same for the 3 billion people that have no access to energy or water or clean fuels, and the other 4.8 billion that are discussing about decarbonization in their manufacturing. So you understand that this is an immense geopolitical problem. It's an immense technological problem. The solution for that will be technology, but it's also an immense educational problem. Education will be at the basis of any change in the future, and this means that we have to invest on young generations. And you understand that this is very different here or in underdeveloped countries, for instance. Now, which are the measures that, let's say, wealthy countries or G20 are developing to face this gigantic problem? So, as you understand, we cannot talk in terms of climate change alone. Climate change is a face of the medal, but there will be no success on the climate change reduction if we will not be able to reduce concomitantly all the global inequalities. So global inequalities and climate change are just connected, strongly interconnected, primarily because the extreme events generated by the climate change, we've seen the rainfall in Germany or in Italy, they're killing people, they're destroying houses, but they are much worse and they're experienced in a much worse way in vulnerable countries. So we cannot separate these two aspects of the same, these faces of the same medal. So what are we doing? What is the responsibility of the rich states towards the vulnerable states in a global vision? So we're trying to develop a concept that who pollutes has to pay. So we're giving a price to carbon dioxide emission. Carbon price is actually something that should level the ambition and should convince all countries that if some country produces too much carbon dioxide, has to pay a lot of money. And this should essentially give a rule to the trading activities, to the manufacturing, to the capability, the technological capability of all living countries to reduce greenhouse gas. We have agreed that by 2025, carbon and coal unabated power systems will be phased out. Basically, coal power stations, coal-based manufacturing. Some country says that this is too early. Well, it's understandable. It could be 2030 for some country, but this is the major carbon dioxide production due to the coal technology. And of course, in the meantime, there is a strong debate about canceling completely, subsidizing the coal technologies. You know, today, even in Italy, we're still subsidizing benzene and diesel for transportation. I mean, on one hand, this is socially important because our trading activity are based on wheel transportation, but on the other hand, those are dangerous incentives for the environment. So if we cut those incentives, we do a good job for the environment, but on the meantime, we damage a lot of workers, a large workforce connected to transportation. And the transition to swap from wheel transportation to, for instance, train transportation will require years. So what do we do during those years? Because there's urgency to reduce carbon dioxide, but we cannot kill the workforce. So sustainability, as usual, is a compromise between different instances. One instance is typically to reduce the impact on climate, but the other one is to reduce the impact on workforce, and we need to find a compromise. A very important point is technology neutrality. We need to develop any kind of technology which is able to produce energy or to power systems, mechanical system, transportation system, mobility, without producing greenhouse gas and carbon dioxide. You've seen from the nice presentation of Fabiola Gianotti before, and by the way, ciao Fabiola, I'm sorry I cannot be there to see you in person, but anyway, you've seen by the nice presentation that from basic science, sometimes you get fantastic solutions for real problems, and this is the history of humanity. Now, this is exactly the time to invest more in research, development, and knowledge and education, because we need new solutions. Now, the only trick we have is we increase renewable energy production, so solar and wind-based production. We need to develop accumulators because we need to stabilize the net. We need to develop smart grids, so artificial intelligence on the electricity grid. We need to develop new power sources. I mean, nuclear, fourth generation nuclear or fusion in the future might provide solutions. The point is there should be no ideology whatsoever behind technology. We need to develop all kinds of technologies. We read recently something very interesting. You can trap the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, from the air. You can transform it into calcium carbonate like a solid rock. Okay, this is not very effective now. I think 4 million tons, so very little compared to what we inject in the atmosphere. But it's fantastic, the idea that you revert the process. You get a gas and you make a rock to extract carbon dioxide. Maybe this will never be the solution, but we need to study. So again, research and development and education is going to be the weapon to be successful and to reduce inequalities and, of course, to reduce climate change. Now, a third point, I'm going quickly to the conclusion. The third point that we're discussing within the international community is a massive action towards adaptation and loss and damage. Adaptation clearly means that we accept the problem. The problem is there. We woke up too late, but the problem is there. And we've seen it by the extreme weather events, even in Italy, that was normally quite a mild area. So the problem is there, and we're trying to mitigate. Mitigating means creating infrastructure that are resilient, prevention, observation, including satellites in combination of drones and land sensors and high-performance computing or cloud computing on big data systems. You know, those are solutions that should mitigate, should help humans to forecast the change. But of course, in weak countries, you cannot talk about high performance computing there. You cannot talk about big data analytics. In weak countries, you need electricity network, you need safe water pipeline, you need gas for heating and cooking. So you need the basic infrastructure. That means ultimately that finance should support the fight to climate change and the fight to global inequalities. Now, the G20 in 2015 agreed that we should have raised $100 billion every year, dollars every year, to be given to the vulnerable countries. We never made this, never. Last year, I think we accomplished 80 billion. So the rich countries were not very serious in that. Okay, we had the COVID in the middle, but also the vulnerable countries had the COVID. And as usual, big problems impact by far harder on vulnerable countries. So it was the same with COVID. Now, this year, there will be an extra effort to reach the 100 billions that the G20 countries have to deliver to support, to reduce the inequalities in the vulnerable countries. But on top of that, there must be a new financial frame at global level. We have to change the rules because this 100 billions is nothing for about 100 poor countries. The 100 billions should be just a public spark to generate a trillion-based intervention every year. And the trillion-based can only be done by philanthropic institution, investment banks, private investors. So we need a new global public-private partnership to reach the trillion range that is needed in 10 years to reduce inequality in a substantial way. My message is very clear. The public responsibility is that if we don't reduce drastically the global inequalities, even if we win the fight with the climate change, this will be dedicated only to a part of the Earth population. But the problem will stay for everybody. So that is the double responsibility of the public. Developing technology, R&D, culture, education, legal frame, financial frame to fight against the climate change. Developing infrastructure, that means electrifying most of the manufacturing, most of the mobility, delivering green electricity to the power-intensive, energy-intensive activities like mobility or manufacturing. That means a lot of renewable energy and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, increasing the level of the vulnerable countries. Otherwise, those countries will pay too much a price of our past mistakes. Finally, and that's my final point, rules and governance are not secondary in this discussion. You know, according to the Paris Agreement, there is a famous Article 6 that is establishing the accounting methods, the rules, how we should behave as countries. Just to give you an example, we have nationally determined contribution. That means a country states, this year I've improved my situation, I've reduced my carbon dioxide, I've decreased my coal use, and I've improved something else, resilience of the electric grid, for instance. But there is no common metric, and there is no common accountability system. So I can state that I reduced my carbon dioxide by 40%, but no one is going to check this. And when we make the global strategy, we just take the nationally determined contribution, we put them together, but there is no transparency frame agreed. So actually, who is going to verify, who's going to check that the numbers are true? And this is very important, because if the numbers are not true, if the metric is not common, and if we don't use all the same metric, in the end of the day, we might conclude that the situation is somewhere, but we are actually somewhere else. And this is exactly what happened this year, when we were sure, having done a lot of work, and then the IPCC demonstrated that we were much worse than we were supposed to be. So Article 6 means transparency framework, a metric and the KPIs for the nationally determined contribution, common reporting tables. So we have to trust each other. It's a common fight, it's a common battle, it's a common challenge, it's a common threat. And we need numbers to be clearly accounted, clearly measured, and clearly recognized by everybody. So those are the responsibilities of the public. I will be in this job still for a while. I'm a scientist, as you know, so this is not exactly my word, but I think I'm trying to put some quantitative approach into something that, if too much qualitative, gets too dangerous for the humanity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.